At 0130 hours local time, 80 Ukrainian unmanned aerial vehicles were racing through Russian airspace, heading straight toward a logistics center near Moscow when everything suddenly went dark. There was no longer stable GPS, no longer a reliable satellite signal, only a screen full of interference, distorted coordinates, and an invisible enemy trying to pull them off their flight path. What happened next seemed impossible. Ukrainian UAVs had penetrated deep into Russian territory to strike one of the most important logistics targets feeding Moscow's war machine, Nara Production and Logistics Complex. This was a massive military facility including ammunition depots, fuel storage, military supply warehouses, and material assembly points covering an area of 200 hectares located inside military town. No three, but these UAVs were not flying through an empty sky. They were moving into an area covered by Russian radar, air defense, and electronic warfare. Russia's jamming systems could distort navigation signals, cut satellite links, and make UAVs lose the ability to determine their exact position. For many ordinary drones, losing GPS at such depth would almost mean failure. But these were not civilian drones that only knew how to fly by direct control signals, then lose direction as soon as the connection was cut. These were AN-196 Liutyi, long-range strike UAVs designed to continue flying even when the electronic environment around them was being suffocated. The first step to approaching Nara was to weaken the electronic defense layer protecting the area. If just one transformer or important communications support station was hit, the defensive network around the target could fall into disorder for several minutes. Ukraine would have a brief blind window to rush into the attack window. But between them and the target was Krasuka-4, one of Russia's most formidable electronic warfare systems. It attacks the enemy's eyes and ears, jamming radar, weakening data links, distorting satellite signals, and making it difficult for UAVs to hold a precise flight path. Inside the control vehicle, Russian crews watched the screens as the jamming zone began to cover the Ukrainian formation. They waited for the UAVs to drift off course, drop altitude abnormally, or fall before they could reach the target. But they waited in vain. The AN-196 Liutyi did not depend on a single GPS signal. They combined inertial navigation, preloaded route data, and flight path correction algorithms to continue moving forward. When the Russians jammed GPS, Liutyi did not stop. When the satellite signal disappeared, they still held their course. This was not magical technology. In modern UAV warfare, the difference lies in preparing for the moment of signal loss before it happens. And that is what turned these UAVs from hunted targets into weapons capable of ignoring the electronic darkness. Meanwhile, half of the Ukrainian UAV formation had almost disappeared from the tracking screens. The northern group split away from the main formation following the Nara River Valley, accepting an additional 30 miles of flight distance in exchange for a more important advantage, remaining outside the effective observation range of Russian radar. Ukrainian intelligence had mapped every radar station along the approach route, identifying invisible corridors where terrain, the curvature of the Earth, and radar limitations created blind spots wide enough for UAVs to slip through. But flying inside those corridors was like shooting an arrow at 110 miles per hour. Drift just 500 yards to the left, and the radar of an S-400 system could catch the signal. Drift 500 yards to the right, and they would enter the detection zone of a mobile Buck M3 battery. Altitude also had to be maintained almost absolutely. If they climbed above 200 feet, the UAVs could appear on radar screens from the forward defensive area all the way to the protective layers near Moscow. The formation split began to take effect. Russian radar operators detected signs of the UAV group near the junction between the M3 highway and the A108 ring road, then redirected Pantsir S-1 systems toward that direction to intercept. But they did not know that 80 other UAVs were still hiding inside the river valley, exploiting a basic law of physics. At an altitude of only about 150 feet, ground-based radar can see a target only at a limited distance before the horizon hides it. The low and winding terrain of the valley concealed the northern UAV group. At the Air Defense Command Center of the logistics area, Russian officers faced a nightmare choice: move mobile forces north and expose other approach directions, or split the defense and accept the risk that both UAV groups could break through at the same time. They had only a few seconds to decide, and the final advance toward Moscow was no longer a simple flight path. It had become a problem of deceiving radar, splitting the defense, and forcing the enemy to react incorrectly at the most critical moment. The communications support station sat on a high piece of ground with an almost open view in every direction. It was a deadly trap. Any UAV flying into this area could be exposed from a distance of 1 mile before it could reach the target. But Ukrainian strategists had found an exploitable weakness: a mobile transmission tower located about 600 yards to the southwest. If the electromagnetic shadow around this structure still existed, Ukrainian UAVs could approach the communications support station without being detected by radar too early. Hitting this target was not just about destroying a single technical station. It could disrupt the communications supporting air defense around the Nara production and logistics complex, slowing the process of calling reinforcements, transmitting target data, and coordinating mobile units. More importantly, it would set the conditions for the second UAV group to rush into the logistics area while the Russian command system was being thrown into disorder. But there was one problem: the intelligence was 1 week old. If the Russians had simply moved a mobile radar, changed the position of an air defense team, or placed additional sensors near the communication station, the entire UAV formation would fly straight into a trap. The lead pilot's hand tightened on the control stick as the UAVs approached the blind spot that was believed to still exist. No one could be certain it was still there. They could only know the truth once they had already entered the attack. In the final 300 yards, being exposed meant death could come almost instantly. The two S-38 Derivatsiya-PVO operating crew would have less than 6 seconds to react. But 6 seconds is a very long time when a 57mm air defense cannon is turning its barrel toward you. One UAV had to fly first, betting its survival on a blind spot that may have disappeared days earlier, and it had to open the way for the rest of the UAV swarm to strike this communications support station and push deeper inside Nara. The southern group reached the area of the Nara communications support station at 0146 hours local time. They did not fly straight at the target, but exploited the biggest weakness of this area. The Nara production and logistics complex was up to 200 hectares wide, making it impossible for the defense system to cover every direction at the same time. Ukraine had already mapped the gaps between radars, sensors, air defense positions, and logistic structures. The UAVs slipped along the edge of the complex, hugging low structures, technical roads, and areas of background interference. They were not trying to pierce the entire defensive shield of Nara. They only needed to find the right narrow path where that shield had not yet closed. The UAVs appeared on radar screens for only a few short seconds, enough to reorient their flight path, but too brief for the defense system to classify them as clear targets. Immediately after that, they dropped low again, hiding in the terrain background and the structures below. It was a dangerous game of hide-and-seek with the Russian radar network, but this time the reward was the road leading straight to the communications support station. Two S-38 Derivatsiya-PVO systems had been hurriedly deployed to protect the area. This was Russia's most modern air defense artillery system. The two S-38 uses a 57mm automatic cannon with a firing rate of 120 rounds per minute, designed to deal with UAVs, cruise missiles, and low-flying targets. With programmable explosive rounds and fast reaction speed, it is far more dangerous than older air defense guns. If it detected the target in time, it could turn the UAV's final flight path into a death corridor. And the Liutyi, approaching at 110 miles per hour, had almost no chance of getting through. But the weakness still lay in reaction time, firing angle, and the ability to track targets in a confined area. When UAVs flew close to technical structures, power poles, and warehouses, the two S-38 crews could not fire recklessly. A single burst in the wrong direction could damage the very facility they were trying to protect. Through the thermal camera of the leading AN-196 Liutyi, the Ukrainian pilot saw the target, the central equipment cluster of the Nara communications support station. This was where signals were processed, data was relayed, and communications were supported between the air defense units protecting the logistics area. If this station was hit, the transmission of warnings, calls for reinforcements, and coordination of mobile units around Nara could be delayed at the most critical moment. And this was when the formation began to split. 30 Liutyis opened into a pincer formation at a distance of about 1.5 miles. The 10 leading drones climbed, deliberately exposing their signals for a few seconds to draw the attention of the air defense crews. Almost immediately, the Tu-2S-38 Derivatsiya-PVO systems turned toward them. Radar and electro-optical sensors began tracking the targets. Then the 57mm cannons opened continuous fire, sweeping straight into the group of UAVs flying higher. Bursts of programmable explosive rounds tore through the forward formation, shooting down 6 Liutyis in only a short period of time. That was exactly what Ukraine wanted. While the first group of UAVs drew fire, the second and third groups stayed low close to the ground, approaching from 2 different directions. One group suddenly appeared near the technical fence, at a distance too short for the air defense crews to handle perfectly in time. The other rushed in from the east, using rows of warehouses and infrastructure poles to cut the observation angle of the defense system. The Russian crews were forced to divide their attention. If they focused on the UAVs flying higher, they could miss the 2 groups of low targets rushing in. If they shifted to the low targets, the decoy UAVs could continue disrupting their decision-making in the final seconds. With a modern air defense system, the problem is not always firepower. The problem is choosing the right target at the right moment. As all 3 groups of Liutyis passed through the outermost defense layer, they converged on the communications support station from 3 different angles. The first strike came from the low-flying drones. It slammed into the power and transmission equipment area, shaking the entire station cluster. The 220-pound high-explosive warhead detonated on impact, tearing apart control cabinets, cable lines, and signal relay equipment. A few seconds later, the second UAV group, with 4 drones remaining, dived down onto the antenna section and the communications equipment cluster above, launching a fireball 150 feet into the air and cutting off the ability to maintain stable connection with the surrounding air defense units. The third group completed the strike by crashing into the auxiliary control area, which should have helped isolate the damaged section and restore emergency communications. 3 strikes. 3 different approach angles. Not enough time to react. The Nara Communications Support Station was not only attacked as a technical target, it was hit directly in its most important role, keeping the air defense network around the logistics area able to see each other, talk to each other, and call for reinforcements in time. When this station fell into chaos, the second UAV group gained what it needed most: a brief gap in the Russian command system to rush inside the Nara production and logistics complex. But the real paralysis came in the next instant. The strike did not engulf the entire area in flames, but it hit exactly the point that the defense system around Nara needed most: the ability to communicate and coordinate. The antennas were torn apart. The central equipment cabinets, signal amplifiers, radio transmitters, and data cable lines were destroyed almost at the same time. In the first few seconds, the UHF-VHF communication channels used to transmit short commands between the command station, forward radars, and air defense batteries began to flicker and then break apart. Backup systems immediately tried to restore the connection. But switching to secondary channels did not happen instantly. Military routers needed to restart, encryption devices needed to resynchronize their keys, and mobile radio stations had to find clean frequencies again inside the chaotic jamming zone. During the first 5 minutes, the defense network around Nara no longer operated as a unified system. In that golden window of time, the defense system around Nara was not completely destroyed, it only lost its rhythm. And while the Russian crews were still trying to reconnect communications, Ukraine's second UAV group had already rushed deep inside the Nara production and logistics complex. At 0154 hours local time, the Pantsir S-1 crew at the center of the Nara production and logistics complex began to realize that something was wrong. The defensive world around them did not collapse with one massive explosion, it collapsed through silence. The Nara Communications Support Station, which should have transmitted warnings about the attack, could no longer send stable information. The signal relay equipment had been destroyed. The early warning radar in the area had also had its antenna cluster broken after the previous strike, tearing the air defense picture around the logistics area into pieces. The Pantsir S-1 system itself was still operating. The vehicle engine was still running steadily. The radar and electro-optical sensors on the vehicle could still rotate to search for targets. But Pantsir was not designed to fight as an isolated island. It was a node in a layered air defense network, needing data from early warning radar, the command station, and surrounding observation units. Now those links had been cut apart. No warning data from the communication station, no target information transferred in time, no way to call reinforcements clearly. The Pantsir crew only knew about the threat when it appeared on their own screen. That turned minutes of preparation into seconds of reaction. About 2 miles to the north, the second swarm of AN-196 Liutyis was rushing inside the logistics area. They did not fly along an obvious straight line. They followed technical roads, internal rail lines, low warehouses, and strips of metal infrastructure, where steel tracks, power poles, warehouse roofs, and cables created complex background interference for radar. Russian air defense doctrine often classifies many low-flying signals near logistics infrastructure as ground clutter, technical vehicles, or unclear targets requiring further verification. Ukraine exploited exactly that delay. By maintaining a low altitude of 130 feet, the Liutyis tried to stay below the effective observation zone of the main search beam from the P-182 Prima radar in the area. This timing was not accidental. The strike on the communication station had caused the Russian crews to lose coordination rhythm. When warnings were not fully transmitted, each battery had to see for itself, classify for itself, and decide for itself. In a high-speed UAV battle, that was the difference between intercepting from a distance and only seeing the target when it had already rushed into the danger zone. Without stable GPS, the Liutyis relied on inertial navigation, preloaded route data, and terrain markers visible through their sensors. A railway segment, a cluster of warehouses, a small bend in the river, a technical road. Each landmark helped them confirm that they were still moving toward the center of the logistics area. But even to the Russians, something was also wrong. The light poles and equipment clusters that should still have been operating around the communications area were now only dark patches. Either the system had been damaged more heavily than the initial report suggested, or the real attack was coming from another direction. The Pantsir gunner narrowed his eyes at the noisy thermal screen, trying to distinguish real targets from reflections from metal roofs, rail lines, and logistics structures. He had to switch to local reaction. The turret could rotate 30 degrees per second, the missiles and guns were still ready, but that was not enough to track a target rushing in at 110 miles per hour. No accurate early warning, no clear target priority order, no reinforcements arriving in time. The Pantsir S-1 crew aimed and fired without precise calculations from radar. He had to estimate everything with the naked eye and launch missiles based on experience and luck. A hot streak flashed on the thermal screen, pulling the Pantsir S-1 gunner's attention toward the edge of the logistics area. Something was gliding between the rows of warehouses and low tree lines, too stable to be interference, too fast to ignore. He turned the turret to the right. But the Nara communication station had been damaged, the early warning radar had lost its antenna cluster, and the target data being transmitted back was flickering and distorted. Pantsir was still operating, but the air defense picture around it had broken into pieces. Then the screen began to light up. A large cluster of signals was rushing into the center of the Nara production and logistics complex. The 40 AN-196 Liutyi that had earlier split away from the main formation and followed the Nara River valley had arrived. They had crossed the outer layer of the logistics area and were advancing toward the main target, the ammunition and weapons depot located deep inside the complex. The Pantsir crew had no time left to wait for instructions. They could not clearly call for support. The secondary communication channels were too noisy, and the command center controlling the logistics area could not transmit stable coordination orders to the surrounding units. Pantsir still had missiles. It still had cannons. But it had to fight almost alone. The crew commander gave the order to fire. The first 57 E-6 missile left the launch tube, dragging a white streak through the night. Then the second, the third. The launch tubes fired one after another, trying to build an interception wall in front of the approaching Liutyi formation. In a few chaotic minutes, the Pantsir crew fired a total of 36 missiles, almost the full rhythm of fire they could unleash while cut off from the command network. Explosions appeared in the low sky. One Liutyi was torn out of the formation, then the second, then the third. Debris fell among the technical roads, warehouse roofs, and vehicle storage yards. With every target locked, Pantsir still proved why it was Russia's dangerous final defensive layer, but as the UAV formation spread out and dropped lower, the missiles were no longer enough to stop them all. The crew immediately switched to anti-aircraft guns. The two 30mm, two A38M automatic cannons of the Pantsir S1 began to roar. Bursts of 30mm rounds tore through the night, forming long red streaks of fire sweeping across the low sky above the logistics area. The lines of fire followed one another like flaming whips, trying to cut across the flight paths of the Liutyis rushing in at high speed. But the problem was not that Pantsir could not hit. The problem was that there were too many targets. The degraded radar made target classification slower. Cut communications meant the crew received no warnings from other directions. Unstable tracking data forced the missiles to chase signals that appeared clear one moment and faded the next. Meanwhile, the Liutyis were not flying in a straight line to be destroyed one by one. They spread out, dropped lower, changed direction, and approached from multiple angles. Every time Pantsir focused on one group, another group slipped past at the edge of the screen. Every time the gunner tried to hold a target lock, background interference from warehouses, power poles, and metal structures made the signal fluctuate. The system could handle a small attack, but this was a saturation attack. After the intense interception with 57 E-6 missiles and 30mm 2 A38M cannons, 28 AN-196 Liutyis were destroyed. That was a large number. For any ordinary attack, such losses might have been enough to break the entire mission. But not this time. 12 still got through the final layer of fire. They flew low across the edge of the logistics area, passing burning UAV wreckage and columns of smoke from the interceptions. No support unit arrived in time. No other battery received enough data to lock targets accurately. No communications center remained stable enough to pull the entire defensive network back into one unified body. Pantsir had fired. It had destroyed most of the formation, but it could not destroy them all. And in UAV warfare, as long as the surviving drones can carry their warheads to the right place, the entire defensive calculation collapses. At 01:54 hours, local time, the 12 remaining AN-196 Liutyis synchronized the final attack wave using their integrated clocks. There was no radio signal to reveal the coordination, no direct control command for Krasuka 4 to suffocate. Each drone rushed toward the target along a pre-programmed route, separated by only a few seconds. On the noisy screen, the Pantsir crew could still see them, but it was too late to stop them all. Ahead of them was the main target, the ammunition and weapons depot of the Nara logistics area. Their thermal cameras opened onto the core of the complex. Long rows of warehouses, military container yards, fuel assembly areas, transport vehicles, and ammunition storage buildings packed close together. This was no longer a secondary target. This was where Nara stored the most important things for the war machine: artillery shells, rockets, missiles, fuel, weapon parts, and logistics equipment. The Liutyis split into three groups. The first group rushed into the warehouse area storing artillery shells. The second group struck the weapons, container yard, and technical spare parts area. The third group targeted the fuel and transport vehicle area. They did not need to destroy the entire logistics complex. They only needed to hit the points that would allow fire and explosions to spread by themselves. The first explosion shook the eastern warehouse area. The roughly 220-pound warhead tore through the steel roof, equipment cabinets, and ammunition pallets inside. A few seconds later, another drone slammed into the fuel area, causing diesel tanks, field fuel drums, and supply vehicles to catch fire. The flames quickly spread across the internal roads, blocking the fire crew's access routes. Then the decisive blow came. A group of Liutyis rushed into the main ammunition depot, where an estimated 280 tons of artillery shells, rockets, and combat supplies were believed to be stored. The initial explosion was not the largest, but it triggered secondary explosions. Clusters of ammunition inside began detonating one after another, sending columns of fire bursting through the warehouse roof. The blast pressure blew open steel doors, collapsed part of the warehouse structure, and scattered debris across the logistics area. Within minutes, the center of Nara turned into an uncontrollable chain of fires and explosions. An estimated 200 to 300 tons of ammunition may have been destroyed or heavily damaged, including artillery shells, rockets, mortar rounds, missile components, and propellant containers. At least 20 to 30 logistics transport vehicles were burned or rendered inoperable. Thousands of liters of fuel and lubricating oil were consumed by fire, leaving the supply area unable to recover that same night. The damage was not only in the number of tons of ammunition destroyed, the bigger problem was that the supply rhythm had been cut. Every burned ammunition crate meant another truckload had to replace it. Every destroyed spare parts warehouse meant a weapons unit would have to wait longer for repairs. Every lost transport vehicle was one logistics link pulled out of the network. The meaning of the strike was not only in the black columns of smoke rising from military town number 3, Ukraine had struck an important logistics link near Moscow, a place storing ammunition, weapons, fuel, and supply materials for the Russian army. When Nara was paralyzed, the damage was not only a few hundred tons of ammunition destroyed, but also the disruption of the entire rhythm of transporting and distributing military equipment. More importantly, the attack happened right before the May 9 Victory Day celebration, forcing Russia to tighten security around Moscow and place additional pressure on its air defense system. The message was very clear. Even military facilities near the capital were no longer absolutely safe. Do you think this attack had greater meaning in terms of logistics damage or in terms of psychological impact on Russia? Leave your comment below and do not forget to subscribe to the channel to follow the next analyses. Goodbye!